In today's candle making tutorial, I'm going to be making a crystal inspired candle, and the first thing that I need to do is melt my wax down. I'm using a soy pillar wax, and I'm using a soy pillar wax because it is good to be pouring it into my mold. Now if you use a straight soy wax, you will find it's quite hard to actually get out of any sort of mold that you do use, because soy wax, 100% soy wax, is quite a soft wax. So that is why I am using a pillar wax blend. You could also use a paraffin wax because that wax is quite a strong and tough wax. Once I've got my wax melted down and to the correct temperature, this one needs to be poured at 60 degrees. I'm then going to be pouring it into my silicone mold. The silicone mold I'm using is a plant pot silicone mold, which works perfectly for the candle that I am making, and I'm also going to be using 2 different sizes with that. The next step is I want to add a bit of a swirl going through my candle mold. I did leave my wax for a little bit too long and it did start to solidify, which is okay because I can just always heat it back up again with my heat gun to create that swirl. So I'm using some liquid candle dye, and this color is called Violet, and I've just got a metal skewer and I've added a little bit of that on, and I'm just going to be going along the edge of my mold and placing a little bit of that dye all the way along, and then with my heat gun going back in just to help melt that wax a little bit more to get that to start to swirl through my soy wax that doesn't have any color, and that's going to create a really cool marble effect. Now ideally I would want to do this a bit sooner, before the wax had started to harden as much as it did, but it's not a big deal because I can just go back in with my heat gun. I don't like to do this at the very start when I first pour my wax, because I do find sometimes it's a bit too liquidy and it can end up all the color just sinking to the bottom or completely coloring the wax instead of just creating a swirl. So that's why I always like to pour my wax without the color in, and then let the wax cool down slightly and go back in with just a bit on my skewer and swirl that on through my wax just to create that really pretty effect. Something to be mindful of when you are doing this technique, if you are going to use a heat gun to help melt a bit of that wax down, just be really careful about how much heat you do add, because if you do too much heat, you can end up damaging your silicone molds and make them break faster. So less is more when you are using a heat gun against a silicone mold. Now I've left this for about 5 to 6 hours to fully set before I did demold it. I could have probably demolded it a bit sooner, but you do run the risk of accidentally breaking it if it is still a little bit soft. So it's better to leave it for longer than to try to take it out too soon and end up breaking the first part of your crystal candle. And I did all the exact same steps with this one as well. This one is a smaller mold, but it's the exact same sort of shape. And this one is from Nicole Moulds, and I do have a discount code and I'll link it down below. I really like these Nicole Moulds. I find the silicone is really soft and easy to pull back. It's not the firm, hard silicone, so it does make demolding wax really easy. You can also use these molds on eco resin and resin as well, and I do like the fact that they come with that hard shell, so that way they stay really nice while they are setting. There's no chance of that silicone warping as a piece sets. So these two are actually going to be the base for my crystal candle to go into, and that's why I did go with the silicone plant pot mold and pour my wax into that to start with. Now I could have gone for a straight pillar candle mold, but because I knew I wanted to cut part of the side away so that way it would reveal more of the crystal candle when I do put that in, it's a lot easier to do that on this plant pot mold because obviously the edge is really thin than to try to cut into a fully solid pillar candle. So what I'm doing now is I've just got a Stanley knife and I've heated that up with my heat gun because it's going to make it so much easier to cut through the wax. If you do try to cut through wax when it is cold, you will find that sometimes you can accidentally break it because it can be a little bit brittle. But if you use a knife that has been heated up, it's going to just melt straight through that wax and glide really easily, and it will make your life so much more simple and you won't risk the chance of completely breaking the candle. And then I'm just following those exact same steps of heating the knife up to be able to cut out a little bit of a crystally shaped chunk from my smaller candle. So for this next part, I'm going to be adding in some soy wax to the base of my candle. Now this is 100% soy wax. I'm not using the pillar wax anymore because I've already got my candle structure happening. So soy wax I can pour at a cooler temperature, so I'm not concerned about it melting the outside of the candle that I've already made because I'm only pouring it about 50 degrees. I'm placing in 2 wicks for my larger candle, and I've just put just a little bit of wax down, place those wicks in, and let that set before I then add the rest of my wax. And I'm just going to be pouring up to the top of the cutout, so that way I get a nice base to my candle to start adding the crystals onto. When it comes to adding fragrance in, I am just adding fragrance into this wax that I'm doing right now. So I've mixed about 7% into my soy wax before I've poured it out. Now, if you wanted to, you could add fragrance into each stage of making this candle. It's just completely personal preference with how much fragrance you do want in your candle. Now for this next part, you're going to need some gel wax as well as some paraffin wax. So in this first container, I'm doing 50% gel wax and 50% paraffin wax. And then in my second jug, it's going to be completely 100% gel wax. I've also colored my gel wax with some purple liquid candle dye, and I've just done it really lightly for this first part, and I'm pouring this first lot of gel wax onto a baking tray that also has some baking paper down. You could use a silicone mold too if you wanted to, but gel wax needs to be poured quite hot, so this one got poured at 110 because it does cool down rapidly and it thickens up really fast, so you can't pour it when it's too cold because it just won't pour out. And then I did go back in with a little bit more of my purple candle dye and just swirled that through half of my gel wax because I did decide I wanted some of my gel wax to be a little bit more of a deeper purple color. And you can see it's already starting to get really thick, even though it's only been like probably 15 seconds since I did pour it out. And I just also want to mention, when I talk about temperature, I'm in Australia, so I'm talking in Celsius and not in Fahrenheit. So if you are in America, you do need to convert that. Now, if you've never worked with gel wax when it has come to candle making, I do have a full beginner's guide, which I'll add a link up above, which goes into a lot more detail in how to work with gel wax and the different types that are out there. So I've left this to cool down, and I think it was honestly like 15 minutes later, it was completely cool. And I'm going back in and just using a pair of scissors to chop it up into really small chunks. And this is going to start making some of my crystals. So gel wax is perfect for this because it actually gives a really beautiful translucent crystally effect that you just can't achieve with any of the other waxes that are out there. So gel wax is really important when you are trying to make this sort of crystal looking candle because it just makes it look so much more realistic. So this is the first way that I'm going to be making my crystals for my candle, and the second way that I'm going to be making my crystals is by using silicone molds that are in crystal shapes. Now, I already had these on hand, but you can get them from eBay and Amazon. I'll add a link to them in the description, and they come in all different sort of shapes depending on what kind of style crystal you want. In the first jug, I've got the 100% gel wax that is already colored purple, and in my second jug I've got that mixture of 50% paraffin wax and 50% gel wax, and I'm pouring those in to my silicone crystal molds. Now, because gel wax does cool down quite fast, I'm making sure that I'm pouring my paraffin gel wax mixture straight after I've poured out my purple gel wax, so that way the waxes will blend together. I don't want my purple gel wax to set before I've managed to do my paraffin mixture on top, because that way I'll get like a really distinctive line. But if I pour them when they're both still hot and liquidy, they'll just give me a really beautiful blending of both of those colors and make the crystal look that little bit more realistic. Now, I let these fully cool down. It didn't take too long because gel wax does set so fast, so I think it was about half an hour, maybe an hour later, I did decide to go through and demold all of these. And of course, you don't have to take them out as soon as they're set. You can leave them in for as long as you want. There's no maximum time limit. So if you are concerned that it might be too soft and you might break them, it's best to just be cautious and leave them in for a bit longer. Now that all of my gel crystals have been made, I can then start adding them to my candle. So I've just used my heat gun to heat up the base of the candle, and then I'm going to start applying my crystals on top. And the reason why I did lightly heat up the soy wax base is because it's just going to help all of my crystals stick into the candle a lot better than just being placed on top of cool wax. And for both of the candles, I'm doing a mixture of the crystals that I made with my silicone molds, as well as the crystals that I made by pouring out onto the baking paper and chopping up the gel wax. I feel like doing a bit of a combination of both just makes it look a little bit different and a bit interesting. But of course you could do one or the other, so you could make all of your gel wax crystals in a silicone mold and then add them on top, or you could just do it with the baking paper and chop it up like that. If you don't have silicone crystal shaped molds, it's completely up to you on which sort of style of crystals you want to use, but I feel like it looks really pretty using both together. For the smaller candle, I added my statement gel crystals to the front and then just filled the rest of it in with my chopped up little crystals. And for my big candle, I decided to put my statement crystals to the back of the candle and then just fill up the rest of the space with the chopped up gel crystals. Then I did just use my heat gun and went over really lightly over the gel wax crystals just to help melt them slightly, so that way they would start attaching to each other. I didn't want to completely melt them and lose the crystal shape, but I also didn't want them to be floating around where they could easily just fall straight out of the candle. So just using a little bit of heat to help melt them to each other, but not too much where you completely lose the shape of the crystal. Now the final step is just to add a little bit of a gold detail to the cut edge that I did in my candle, and this just helps sort of like highlight that edge, makes it look a little bit more geode slash sort of rough crystally amethysty looking. Now this is completely personal, you don't have to do this. I'm just using a mica powder that is candle safe and applying that with a paintbrush. So this is just the powder directly onto the wax, there's nothing else in that, and the powder will naturally want to cling to that wax because it is waxy, so you don't need to mix it with anything or make it into a paint for it to be able to stick to the wax. Now this crystal candle is completely made out of wax, but if you do want to make a candle that is similar to this but in an actual container, you can do that using eco resin. And if you would like a tutorial on how to make a crystal candle in a container using eco resin, then let me know in the comments below and I will film a tutorial on that. Just so if you wanted to do that but you don't necessarily want the entire candle made out of wax, you want it to be in a container, but you still want that crystal sort of cut out edge, you can definitely still do that. So let me know in the comments if you would like a tutorial on that as well. And then once I was happy with how my candle was looking, I just went back in and trimmed my wicks down, and this is the finished crystal candles. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I'm always happy to answer any questions you have. And if you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. It really helps my channel out. And if you are new to my channel, please do subscribe as I post new videos every single week. And I have a full playlist dedicated to candle making. So if you want to get into candle making a bit more, definitely go and check out my playlist on it. Thank you so much for watching.